All right, what's up, guys? New season, new tier list. We've got a ton of new decks to review. A ton of new things have come out. First of all, we've had multiple ban lists, number one. Number two, we've got actually 3 packs that have come out because I haven't done any update post Kashtira. So we have all the Kashtira stuff, all the Mechanko stuff, the Purely stuff, the new Legacy pack with the Red Eyes and the Dark Magician and the Clockwork Knight and all of that other various stuff. So we've got a ton of stuff to review. Also, the last few ban lists have been very, very tough on a lot of decks, I'll say that. So a lot of decks have gotten hit, and this is definitely going to be an interesting one. Let's get started. First of all, we have Kashtira. I'd say Kashtira is probably like a tier 2, tier 3 deck, somewhere around here. It's probably at the top of tier 3, only because it doesn't have all of its support yet. Once it has all of its support, it'll be the best deck in the game, unless they hit it significantly. The only thing that's hit right now is Fenrir to 2, which it hurts the deck somewhat, but it doesn't hurt it significantly. Also, you'll see Fenrir in a million other decks, so yeah, the deck is just kind of like an OTK deck right now. It's a decent deck. You're running things like Side Beast. You're running things that aren't as consistent as they should be, but it's not the end of the world. The deck is still kind of like okay. You have to respect it. It's still good. Fenrir is a really strong, I wouldn't say boss monster. It's good at outing boards. Still a very good card. Overall, the deck is actually quite strong, but definitely feared, but not feared as much as like a tier 1 deck. Mechanko is a new ritual deck that has way too many URs in it. It's more so kind of like a ritual engine. You'll see it in a lot of different ritual decks. You can play it, of course, pure. I definitely think it's somewhere around a rogue deck. It's a cool deck. It does have female characters in it, so automatically it's got a million URs. So whether or not you should make it really depends on how much gems you're willing to give up. Honestly, though, I think it's somewhere around a rogue deck. Next is Purely. I'd say Purely is probably like top of tier 3, probably tier 2. It's a really good deck, but again, it's missing support that will be probably waived in the next set whenever that drops. It's definitely a very good deck, and I think it'll benefit from being on Master Duel because it makes a monster that's essentially unaffected by all other cards. And unless your opponent is playing Kaijus or Lava Golem or XYZ Encore, like specific things to out that monster, it can be very, very tough to get rid of it. And there's of course no side decking in Master Duel, so I think this deck will actually really, really benefit from just the best of 1 format that Master Duel provides. Of course, everyone does run Underworld Goddess, which is kind of our universal way of outing any monster that's unaffected by things, but the deck has so many other support cards that even if you out that one monster, they have other plays to make regardless. So the deck is actually quite strong. I'd say probably tier 2. When it drops a new support, as long as the deck doesn't get hit, I could see it going to tier 1. Next is Red Eyes. I'd say Red Eyes is probably somewhere around rogue. It did actually get some new cards. It got 2 new cards. It got the Red Eyes Soul, which I think is a UR, and then it got another Red Eyes monster. I forget off the top of my head, but it's actually an SR. I don't know why they did this, but the SR is actually better than the UR. I have no idea who was running that, who made that decision, but I'm so happy that decision was made, because the UR is like maybe a 1-of if you're playing the burn variant, but the SR is like a very, very good card. It's a level 6 that changes itself into a level 7, so you can summon Meteor Dragon. Like, it's such a better card than the other card. Red Eyes is actually quite decent. You can mix it with Dragon Link and then kind of raise the ceiling of your Dragon Link. You kind of lower the consistency, raise the ceiling, you can get access to some of the Red Eyes stuff. So things like Red Eyes Chain, stuff like that, steal your opponent's monster, attach it as an equip card. So you essentially, you can, when you mix archetypes, sometimes you like I said, you increase the ceiling, but you lower the consistency, because the more different engines you put in, the less likely they are to actually be work all together. Also, I forgot the SR actually searches, it searches Red Eyes Fusion the following turn out of the graveyard, which is kind of cool. A nice follow-up play, I'd say. Next is Galaxy Eyes. Galaxy Eyes, I'd say, is still in rogue. It's got its new support. Again, the new support kind of increases its ceiling, increases its consistency, but the largest problem with Galaxy Eyes has always just been kind of like bricking, running out of resources too early. Not in the sense that you run out of cards to play. I mean, like you run out of gas sometimes. Sometimes you die to a hand trap. It's like, that's kind of the larger issue with Galaxy Eyes. But overall, like, the deck has definitely gotten better because of the new support. Next is Dark Magician. Dark Magician I'm putting in Rogue also. This deck just, the frustrating thing with Dark Magician is it really, in Red Eyes too, they both need Dragoon. Dragoon is their boss monster, and it's just not in the game. It's frustrating if you're trying to play it because these two decks are so much worse without Dragoon. It's kind of unbelievable. Dragoon is definitely like the most important boss monster in this deck because it has all of its effects when you play it in Dark Magician, because obviously you're using it the appropriate way. And yeah, it's just, this deck is like straight up, it's missing its boss monster. It has everything else. It has consistency, it has draw power. Like, this deck has absolutely everything except the boss monster. And it actually got a new boss monster, which is the Gaia the Fierce Knight fusion. But again, that card is just not as good. It's just not as good as it doesn't do what Dragoon does. It doesn't. This Dragoon gives Dark Magician a negate. It gives him a boss monster. It gives him a monster that's hard to out. Like, it does everything that the deck needs, and straight up, that's the only thing that the deck is missing. It's kind of sad that Dragoon terrorized Japan so badly that they banned it in the OCG, and it came out banned in Master Duel, and we haven't ever been able to use it, despite the fact that, let's be honest, there are other monsters and other decks that are much better than Dragoon. There are much better boss monsters. The purely boss monster is better. The Fenrir Kashtira Arise Heart that's going to be coming out is better than Dragoon. Like, there's so many cards that are better than Dragoon, but it's like, it just happens to be banned because of the past, unfortunately. Next is Tier Limit. I'd say Tier Limit is Tier 3. I'm to a certain degree happy that they did this, because it's like the deck was just everywhere, and it was really frustrating to play against because, like, everything triggered everything. The deck had like an answer to everything. The only thing that they really did was just every single time they just kept lowering the consistency and lowering the consistency over and over and over. And one thing that was frustrating about this deck is that it actually got a lot of other decks hit. So things like Terraforming, things like what's another card that got hit? Yeah, Terraforming got hit. The Foolish Burial Goods got hit. Like, so many decks randomly got hit because of tier limits, and I hope they bring back those cards now that the deck is significantly worse than it was before. I'd say tier 3 is still fair. A lot of people are like disrespecting this deck, saying that it should be somewhere in Rogue, like it's not even playable, and where the deck is still very playable. It's just, again, their answer to tier limits in Master Duel has seemed, they don't want to kill the deck, they just want to lower the consistency. So sometimes you'll mill 3 cards and you get nothing, so you just have to pass, and that can be, you know, that's not good. It's just less and less consistent every single time. But the ceiling of the deck is exactly where it always has been. They still make the same boards. They still do all of the same stuff, except, except the other thing that got hit is, since Merly, the level 2 got hit, they can't do a bunch of sprite stuff, which is yeah, it's a decent hit. Next, I'd say this is probably tier 3. This is actually, since the meta all changed, right? Tier limit used to be on top, and a lot of the Ishizu Shuffler, stuff like that, hit a lot of graveyard decks. I actually think that the meta has definitely shifted. So there's a lot more decks up here, which is going to be rather interesting. This is Machina slash Earth Machine. This is another deck that's really interesting, really good. It's actually gotten a new card. It's called Clockwork Knight, which is kind of like Zombie World but for machines, and it's a continuous spell. So it basically makes it so all monsters on the field become machines, and then if you're playing things like Rivalry, you can lock your opponent into machines. In addition to a variety of other things, you basically turn your opponent's monsters into machines, and that can actually significantly hurt what they're able to do, which is really cool. And then it also searches too if it's in the graveyard. But overall, the deck is really good, and Clockwork Knight definitely helps the deck significantly. Next is, and I've been putting this deck in tier 3 the last few times, I'd say, is Crystal Beasts. I actually think this is a very good, very slept on deck. Not a lot of people run it, but it basically has everything that you need, and it's got a new card called Golden Rule. Golden Rule is a card that helps the combo version of this deck, although I think that the control version of this deck is actually better than the combo version of this deck, despite the fact that Golden Rule is in it. There's a new card coming out later on. It's called Revolution Synchron. I don't know when that will come out, but that will break like the boards that you can make with Crystal Beast in terms of the combo variant. But in terms of the Crystal Beast control variant, it's actually very, very strong. Conclave is a very good card, and then of course you have access to all of the good rank 4s like Baguska, stuff like that. Like the deck is super duper duper consistent. Definitely deserves to be somewhere in tier 3. Avoid at all costs. This is the adventure cards. The adventure pure deck is just unplayable because of it's got so many hits that the pure version of this deck is unplayable. I don't know why they released a secret pack for adventure, because the deck is so bad. Like both the engine and the pure deck are so badly hit. I don't even know why they released that secret pack. There's so many other secret packs that need to be made, and they made this one, and I don't even remember the last time somebody activated an adventure card. Like I always say, there are more bricks in the adventure package than there are actual starters in the adventure package because of all of the hits. Like it's just unplayable. So definitely avoid at all costs. Maybe as an engine in like certain decks, but like just pure, not a chance. This is Dragon Link. Dragon Link is probably one of the best decks in the game right now. It does take skill, and you have to know how to play through hand traps. It's one of those decks that definitely takes skill because it's a non-linear combo deck. Non-linear combo decks are the most difficult decks to play in Yu-Gi-Oh, because you can't just go watch like a YouTube video. Oh, what do I do? Like you can't just watch a combo video. Like you can watch a combo video, get a basic like synopsis of what to do, but you know, when somebody DD Crows you or Bystials you or Ashes you or Drolls you, you have to know exactly how to work around that situation, and that's what makes the deck kind of a little more significant to play. And I'm actually very happy that one of the more skill-based decks is one of the most played decks, which is really cool. They still got Chaos Ruler. They've got a lot of cool tools at their disposal. The deck is very strong and very resilient to hand traps. Again, you just need to know what to do. No one hand trap is going to stop this deck. Like, not even Droll is going to stop. Not even Nibiru. There's not a single one hand trap that will completely stop this combo, unless you have a really weak hand. But generally, it's a very resilient, very strong deck. And like I said, you can Ash something, but it doesn't matter because you have so many extenders. This I'm probably putting in Rogue. This is Ignisters. Like, they're cool, but their big gimmick is that they summon a monster that's unaffected by everything. In the graveyard, they have more interruptions. The problem is, again, it's people are if people are preparing for Purely, then they'll definitely be ready for Ignisters. Just because if they're already playing Underworld Goddess and Kaijus and Lava Golem and stuff like that, then this deck is going to be hurt by the fact that this is running around in the metagame. Next is Exo Sisters, probably somewhere around tier 3. It's a deck based around graveyard movement. So if there's graveyard movement, they kind of just go off. This deck was really good in the tier limit format. Like, tier limit and this used to be really annoying to play against, but honestly, since tier limit really got hit, this deck will probably take a little bit of a lag back. And then if they release like the Kashtira stuff, the new stuff, this deck will definitely take a back seat. Dinosaurs are probably somewhere at like Rogue. It's a good deck, but it's kind of not the best. There is new support on the horizon, but unfortunately, I don't even think the new support will really put this deck over the top. It's a good deck, but I think it's just it's waiting on new support, and the optimal way to play this deck is going second, but going second in Master Duel is like a death sentence, because your opponent's going to build full combo and then they're going to max you, and that's just a recipe for disaster. Labyrinth is definitely tier 2. It is one of the it is the best trap deck by far in the game. It has a crazy grind game. If you're low on cards and you're playing against Labyrinth, you are going to lose. Like, there's not a chance that you're not going to lose, because they're going to activate a trap card. They're going to chain furniture in the graveyard. They're going to chain the knight out of the hand. They're gonna like every single time. If you're low on resources, they go like +4 every single turn, and they're basically what's called a tempo deck. So they build advantage over time, and they're gonna keep going +3, +4, +3, +4 every single turn. Your turn, their turn. Eventually, they're just gonna outgrind you. You definitely, if you're playing against this deck, you have to beat them as quick as possible. It's a very strong deck. You have to respect it. Lightsworns are in consider building something else. I always say tier limits are just better Lightsworns, and Lightsworns definitely need support, unfortunately. Raid Raptors are somewhere in Rogue. They do have options that are pretty cool, but honestly, I think Blackwings are just a better version of this deck at this point. Like, this deck can be mixed with this deck can be mixed with like some of the Burning Abyss stuff and Some of the knights, I forget their names exactly, but the knights that have equips, the trap cards, I forget what they're called. But you can mix them with Raid Raptors, but honestly, I think Blackwings are just a better version of the deck. Next we've got Eldritch. Eldritch is, I never thought I'd do this, but I'm going to put it and consider building something else. And what I think you should build instead is Labyrinth. I think this deck is just so power crept. Honestly, if I'm rating like the power level of the deck, I'm probably putting it somewhere in Rogue. But if I'm being honest, there's just an objectively better deck to play, and that deck is just Labyrinth. Labyrinth is the objectively better deck to play. It is a trap deck. It does almost the exact same stuff. It can't play as many floodgates as Eldritch can. Eldritch can play way more floodgates, but honestly, Eldritch is in just such a bad spot right now. All of the floodgates got hit, which makes Eldritch significantly worse. On top of all of the floodgates getting hit, there's Bestials running around, and they absolutely destroy this deck. Like, it's just like you activate, send a card from the field to the graveyard for a cost, and then this thing gets banished, and there's your grind game. There's everything. Like, it's so easy to get rid of Eldritch the Golden Lord. It really sucks that the deck has gotten to this point. Alright, next up we've got Bee Troopers. Bee Troopers are a disaster. They're another rogue deck, honestly. Their end board is just lackluster. There's a new fusion monster that is a battle phase fusion monster. You can look it up. It's in the new pack also. It's a new battle phase fusion monster. Destroys all monsters your opponent controls during the battle phase. Like, it's cool and all. Again, it's just, this deck is just missing really an end board. Like, the deck's not inconsistent. This is the Dragon Link of insects. Very consistent, but the end board is a joke. Like, the cool thing about Dragon Link is it has a good end board, right? You have Borload Savage, you have Abyss, you have Sphere Mode. Like, you have so many cool boss monsters to end on. What the hell are you going to end on in freaking Bee Troopers? Cicada King, Stingalanus in hand to banish one card, special summon. It's like, it's a joke. It's a joke, and it's embarrassing. Yeah, it needs more boss monsters, not its boss monsters is a monster that is you use 4 insect monsters to make, and it's unaffected for like 2 turns. It's not unaffected forever. It's unaffected for 2 turns. I don't know who comes up with this stuff, but definitely in Rogue. Goki is it seems like a bottom of Rogue, kind of like Link spam deck. Ends on another unaffected monster. That's like a huge theme of Yu-Gi-Oh! It's like unaffected monster, unaffected monster, unaffected monster, unaffected monster, unaffected monster. I don't know what's this obsession with unaffected monsters. Ends on a monster that's unaffected by other monsters. That's about it. It's a good Link engine. It'll probably rear its ugly head a little more with Noble Knights. Yeah, if you just any good Link monsters come off the ban list, this deck becomes good. Another rogue deck. This is Monarchs. Monarchs is a good deck that is just prone to bricking. Its biggest problem has always been bricking since day one. It is a decent budget deck. You don't really need an extra deck. You literally, and I don't mean you don't need an extra deck. You only need certain cards. Like, you literally do not need an extra deck. So it is cheap, and I guess that's the advantage there. DDDs is probably like top of Rogue or bottom of tier 3. It's a very good pendulum deck. It takes an incredible level of intelligence to play. This is one of those decks you have to be intelligent to play. You can't play it if you're not that smart. There's nothing you can do. It uses every summoning mechanic. It uses all knowledge that has ever been accumulated on Earth to play for 1 turn, and then you still don't know what you're doing. It's an incredibly it's a deck that requires a lot of talent. If you learn it, the payoff's not worth it, because learning it is like, it's like reading every Harry Potter book. It's like, you got to be that smart. It's too much for me. Next is Familiar Possessed. This is, I always put this in avoid at all costs. It's such a corny deck. Like putting aside the fact that I don't like it, like, this deck is, it does a whole lot of nothing. The monsters have no effects. Its effects are they're effect monsters that are essentially effectless, because no one ever resolves any of their effects. They're carried by their spawn trap cards, which are just okay, and it's basically just Secret Village Turbo. It's not that good of a deck. Neos is probably somewhere in Rogue. Generally, I wouldn't recommend playing Neos, even though Neos is my favorite. It's better just play a mix of all of the heroes than play Neos pure. As much as, like, again, Neos was favorite season in GX. Loved Neos. I mean, looks insane right there. He looks like a bodybuilder. He's great. But I wouldn't recommend playing it pure. These are Fortune Fairies, Fortune Ladies. They're just kind of they're a deck that stuck in 5Ds in the bad way. Like, they're not broken. They don't have any cards in their archetype that are broken. Like, the cool thing about older Yu-Gi-Oh! Is you find those random cards like, whoa, this isn't once per turn? Wow. Like, they don't even have that appeal. They're just not good. This is Adamantipator. They finally got rid of our boy Block Dragon. Kills a lot of the grind game of this deck. Like, that card was very, very important. It was very important for resources. You could summon every single turn. You could protect your life points if you needed to. You always gave yourself link material. You could search the Adamantipator monsters. Like, it was such a good card, and without it there, it really, really, really hinders the power level of the deck. Tunes is in consider building something else. Could be an avoid at all costs if you consider the gem costs. Like, the deck is so expensive to make, and it's so not worth it to make. It is a very... What I like about this deck is I have trouble putting it in consider building something else because there's literally nothing else like it. It's a very original deck. It's very different from every other deck in the game. Its art is cooler than almost every other deck. Its art is awesome. Its playstyle is that you can attack directly, but not the turn the monsters are summoned, except for 2 of them, but all of the other monsters. But the playstyle is so cool, but it's just not strong enough. Toon Kingdom is such a good card, and it gives you protection, and it banishes things, and everything is fine about that, except for the fact that the game now has so many forms of non-destruction removal that Toon Kingdom just kind of... Even Toon Kingdom, the best card in the archetype, is counter power corrupt. Next is Pendulums. Huge boost for Pendulums in they got the new Draco Slayer stuff. Huge boost. They still got Electromite. They still got a lot of things. The deck is actually quite good, quite strong. It's definitely somewhere around tier 3. One thing that I will say that is a little bit frustrating is if Kashtira is meta and it becomes more and more like I said, when the new stuff comes out and it becomes better and better, they can actually just block out your spawn trap card zones. If they block out one Pendulum zone, you cannot play the game, which is a frustrating function of the game, unfortunately. Next is Heroes. This is like the mix of here, like the full mix of heroes. There's all the heroes, Darklaw, Phoenix Enforcer, everybody, the whole squad, Plasma. So this deck is actually quite good, and it's quite good in the meta right now because Darklaw is always good in the meta. It's always good. The deck does, as always, die to Nibiru. They're getting a counter trap sometime soon. Actually, they might already have it, which is good, but unfortunately counter trap is not an on-field negate, so it doesn't actually stop Nibiru. But the good thing about Nibiru is that no one really plays Nibiru right now. So the deck is actually quite in a good place right now because Nibiru is not really being played, so the deck is quite strong. Shadalls is probably somewhere around Rogue. It's a deck that huge in the beginning of the game, but it's really fallen off completely. You'll see it once in a while in like a tier limit engine. You'll see somebody make a Shadal Winda, but there's so many ways to out Shadal Winda now that it's not as much of a threat as it used to be. Blue Eyes is probably somewhere in Rogue. The best way to play Blue Eyes is, honestly, I've tested all of the different versions. Trap Blue Eyes, Combo Blue Eyes, Chaos Blue Eyes. The best way to probably play this deck now is Branded. Branded Blue Eyes is probably the best. It has the best synergy with the deck. It gives Branded free discard fodder because you can use the stones to get back Blue Eyes and discard them. And then you can, of course, send the stones to the graveyard to summon Blue Eyes on the end phase and summon Jet, and then Jet protects your board. So the best way to probably play Blue Eyes is Branded Blue Eyes. I'm probably going to have a profile coming out sometime soon. But the deck, nevertheless, is still a Rogue deck. It's probably somewhere around the middle of Rogue. Next is Wind-Ups, probably another kind of Rogue deck. It's got almost everything pretty much unlocked, but it just hasn't seen any competitive play whatsoever. It's a decent deck that you have to respect, and it has crazy combo potentials. A lot of that, like, kind of older era, not once per turns on it, but overall I'd say it's probably somewhere around Rogue. Wind Witches is probably consider building something else. They're more of an engine than a deck. They just do not have enough monsters, and at the end of the day, the deck just continuously does the same thing, which is just summon Crystal Wing. And sometimes you can summon 2 Crystal Wings, but it's just not really all that great. Phantasm Spiral is probably one of the best Rogue decks you could possibly play. It's probably top of Rogue, almost tier 3. This deck is really, really strong, and it actually just got new support with it's a new trap card, a continuous trap card that came out that is really good in this deck. It can negate pretty much any card. It's like playing another Solemn Judgment, honestly. Yeah, but this deck is one of the best budget decks. It is the best budget deck in the game, period. Like in terms of gem cost, because you don't play an extra deck, so all of that is just gone. You play like a few URs in the main deck, which are like Metaverse. You used to play Terraforming, but that's gone. You used to play Fossil Dig, but that's gone because now you have the new card, which is the Fish Sonar. So like literally all the URs got replaced. I guess the only UR that you really play is there can only be one maybe. But the gem cost in this is just insane considering what you get. It is the best budget deck in the game, and you can pretty much play in every single rank in the game because this deck doesn't. You don't lose to your opponent. You just lose from bricking. You don't like your hands dictate whether you'll win or not. It has nothing to do. It's irrelevant what your opponent is playing, because you have just an answer to pretty much everything, and your opponent doesn't have an answer. Like a lot of the cards that your opponent are playing don't do anything against this deck anyway. Like D-Shifter does nothing, DD Crow does nothing, the Bystials do nothing, and Call by the Grave does nothing. Like there's so many cards in this deck that just do absolutely nothing against. There's so many cards in your opponent's deck that do nothing against this deck that it just makes it so much better. Fernoids are somewhere in tier 3. It's kind of like a going second deck. They're really unchanged. Nothing has really moved around. I mean, it's good that the tier limits got hit, and the not only the tier limits, but like the what are they called? The tier limits slash Ichizu cards got hit. So I guess this deck is slightly better, but overall I think it's pretty much where it's always been. Subterras are really missing Dragoon. They need Dragoon. That is their boss monster. Their archetype doesn't really have like a boss monster, so Dragoon would really help this deck, much like it would help Dark Magician and Red Eyes. Spirals are a good rogue deck. You never ever see, it's very rare that you ever see anybody playing this deck, despite the fact that it's pretty much at full power. But it's another one of those like link decks, like older era link decks, kind of like Goki, where it just depends on what link monsters come off the ban list. That'll dictate whether this deck will be good or not. Batterymen, I was put in consider building something else. You should just play Thunder Dragons. Thunder Dragons are better than Batteryman in every single imaginable way, and you get to play some of the Batterymen if you want to in Thunder Dragons. Element Sabers is probably one of the worst archetypes ever released in the game. It's like, it is such a time displaced archetype. It should have come out years and years and years ago, and it would have still sucked. Altergeist is probably somewhere on Rogue. It is getting new support, but I don't know if the new support will make it, like, maybe make it tier 3, but nothing better than tier 3. It is a good archetype overall. It's probably one of the better spellcaster archetypes. It's better than Dark Magician. It's definitely better than Familiar Possessed. It's better than both of those archetypes, but it's a little bit underwhelming. So it is where it is. It's another one of those decks that shined in Link format because they just didn't. You couldn't summon all of the different summoning mechanics in like the main monster zones, so the game was just a lot. It was just slightly slower, and you can do things like return your opponent's normal summon back to their hand, and then they couldn't play, but now that's kind of not as good. Blackwings are a better version of the Raid Raptors. It's one of the better structure decks that you can buy in the shop. It is very comprehensive. Overall, it's a very good combo deck. It sets up a cool board in that it burns you, and then it sets up it burns you, and the cards are really strong. It's got negates. It's got a monster that's unaffected by other card effects. Again, it's like one of the things in Yu-Gi-Oh that's consistent. They keep making more of these monsters that are unaffected by everything, but I'd say it's probably somewhere around the middle of Rogue. This is bottom of Rogue. This is Gravekeepers. Gravekeepers is unfortunately a deck that absolutely has to go first. It cannot go second. You have to it's frustrating because you cannot build it to go second in any way. You can play like Super Poly and stuff, but that's pretty much it. It's a deck that must go first, and if it doesn't go first, then it cannot. Necro Valley doesn't do much going second. It only really does a lot going first. If you go first, this deck is very good. If you go second, it just doesn't do much of anything. FA is probably somewhere around Rogue. I'd say it's a decent deck, but I wouldn't recommend it highly. It's a synchro deck that modifies levels. It's a cool deck, but it's definitely not that great. Musketeers, Magical Musketeers are a decent rogue deck. Can be played going second or going first. Unfortunately, the boss monster really is only useful going second, and he's kind of useless going first. But the deck in general kind of prefers to go first, so it's a weird situation there. Cyber Angels, I'd say don't play. Makenko is a better ritual deck wherever I placed it, right here, and so is Drytron. Honestly, pure Cyber Angel is just not that good. This is Time Thieves. Time Thieves is one of those decks that I would consider building something else. It's a cool deck, but it's not really all that good. You can play some of the Time Thief cards in other archetypes, like Time Thief Redoer is good in a ton of rank 4 archetypes, but as a deck itself, it's not all that great. Cyber Dragons is probably somewhere at the top of Rogue. It's a good going second deck. You can play with Cyber Dogs or play with Cyber Dragons, and the new Clockwork Knight card is actually quite good in the deck. Next is Jinzo, is a avoid at all costs. Jinzo is just absolutely useless in today's metagame. It does pretty much nothing. It really does. Like, the only thing Jinzo does on a first turn board is like prevent evenly matched, maybe. Like, if your opponent's main if evenly matched is really popular in the format, you could argue that Jinzo could be decent, but like as an archetype, it's just bad. And the whole point is just to avoid. It's just to stop trap cards, but like trap cards are the least used of the 3, like spell traps monsters, so I wouldn't recommend building a deck or playing Jinzo. Predaplants are probably somewhere around Rogue, pure or mixed with branded. I'd say they're probably somewhere around Rogue. They kind of lift the ceiling when you mix them with branded, but again, they lower the consistency. That's usually when you mix archetypes. You increase ceiling, lower consistency. I'd say probably somewhere around Rogue. Dragon Maids are a decent archetype. I'd say it's probably still around Rogue. Like I said, it's one of those decks that is it's very consistent, but it just doesn't have a huge ceiling. It won't end on like a really the craziest Dragon Maid board is like 5 interruptions. Whereas the craziest Dragon Link board is like 10 interruptions, so you don't have as many interruptions. Same thing with Tearlaments. Like Tearlaments end board, like their best board is so much better than the best board on Dragon Maid. Like, it just doesn't have a great ceiling, but it's very consistent. Mathmex is a deck that is really good. I probably say I put it in like tier 3. Its biggest problems are the Bystials. The Bystials absolutely destroy Mathmex, and any graveyard interruptions in general destroy Mathmex because they activate Super Factorial, and you just have any way to move that monster. It resolves as much as possible, but it ultimately doesn't allow them to do the 3 XYZ summon. Aromatherapy is in consider building something else. You should build Plant Link. Don't build Aromatherapy. It is not that great of an archetype. It's cool. I think the design aspect of this deck is cool, but generally speaking, I would recommend Plant Link instead, or Rika's, and you can play some of the Aromatherapy cards in those decks. Kawaki Meru is an archetype that just never worked ever, but some of the cards are useful in Adamantipator, but overall I think it's probably consider building something else. Trap Trick is a good archetype. I think it's probably somewhere around tier 3. It is the second best trap archetype after Labyrinth. Labyrinth is the best trap archetype in the game. It is really good. This is probably second best. It's one of those decks that is very good at going first, but going second it can be a little bit iffy. It does have a really good matchup against Kashtira, and has a pretty good matchup against this deck, which is the Purely, and it has a decent matchup against a lot of the top tier decks, but it usually will lose the grind game against Labyrinth. Next is Phantom Knights, the deck that I forgot earlier. I'd say it's probably somewhere around here. It's like another deck that was like very good at the opening of the game, but it's definitely fallen off hard. I'd say it's a decent deck, not like a great deck. There's a few ways to mix it, but without Rongo, it has never really been as broken of a deck as it was in the beginning. A Dragoonity is just worse Dragon Links. It's like Dragon Link with winged beast monsters in it, so it's just a worse Dragon Link deck. Unfortunately, it's got different boss monsters that you can end on, like their level 10, but their level 10 is like worse than Abyss. He's worse than Warlord Savage Dragon. Like again, it's one of those things where it's like it's just a worse version of the other deck, unfortunately. Next, we've got the Evil Twins. Evil Twins are probably somewhere around Rogue or tier 3, somewhere around here. I'd say it's probably around tier 3. It's a good deck. Again, it's a decent deck. It's just another one that's kind of hurt by the Bystials and their existence. It doesn't, like, if you play against yeah, the Bystials really screw this deck a lot. It is good with sprites, which didn't get hit significantly. They hit like the frog side of sprites. They didn't hit all of the other level 2 archetypes, which level 2/link 2, which this can definitely be played with sprites. So it's definitely probably around tier 3. Burning Abyss I'm going to put next to the Phantom Knights because they're essentially interchangeable. Trap Burning Abyss is really no better than the Burning Abyss with the Phantom Knights. I'd probably say somewhere around Rogue. This is a deck that's going to be a lot better later on. This is Noble Knights. It's going to get support soon, hopefully. It released in the TCG and OCG. When it comes to the Master Duel, I don't know. Next is Zombies. I think Zombies is like around a tier 3 archetype. There's a few different ways to play. You can play it 60 card, you can play with Eldritch, you can play with a variety of different ways. But overall, the deck is actually quite good, and as long as the mill card, the big mill card, Grassic Screener, remains in the game, this deck will always be somewhat good, and especially if you have a way to search it. Next is, this is Floowandereeze. I'd probably say is tier 2. A lot of people will say that, oh, it's not that good. It's yeah, like, listen, it is a lot more of a skill-based deck than it used to be because you can't just sit on a barrier statue. That's number 1. Number 2, the deck is actually really quite strong because it will always be strong because Max C does nothing against it, and you can still use Max C within the deck. So it's like a one-sided Max C at all times, and you don't have to play all of the stuff that like prevents Max C, like all of those stupid cards. You don't have to play that junk in your deck. You have to play Call by the Grave. You don't have to play the other card that stops it. I forget its name. Cross out. Like, you don't have to play any of that junk. You don't have to play any of it. You don't have to put any of your deck slots. You don't have to commit any of your deck slots to dealing with Max C, and at the same time, you can play Max C yourself, so it's actually really, really good. Next is Sword Soul. Sword Soul is, I'd say, probably maybe even tier 1. Tier 2 or tier 1. I'm going to move it once I do some loading here. I'd say it's probably, it could even be tier 1 best decks. I should put that, best decks. Because there is no one best deck. Like, technically speaking, I think Dragon Link is probably the best deck, but I'd say Sword Soul is definitely up there. It's a very, very strong deck. It's super consistent. It's one of the most consistent Sinker archetypes in the entire game. Really, really, really strong deck. Very easy to learn, but very hard to master. Definitely somewhere around tier 1. This is, I'd probably say it's somewhere around tier 3. This is the Kairyu Umi deck. This deck is very good. Still very good against the majority of the metagame. As you can see, there's, how many water archetypes do you see up here? None. There's no, above tier 3, there's no water archetypes. So you drop this, and it basically is super good against your opponent. It outs their entire board. It doesn't activate. Like, Kairyu is just a crazy, crazy, crazy boss monster. Still a very, very strong card. Sylvans is, and consider building something else. I recommend you play Plant Link or Rika. Don't play pure Sylvan. This is Dinomorphia. I'd say it's probably somewhere around Rogue. Dinomorphia is another deck. You have to pay half your life points. Like, that's all cool to activate effects, and then you can protect your life points with the traps in the graveyard. All of that is cool, fine and dandy. Rexstrom is a really good card. It's one of those decks that, again, it just kind of needs to go first, and it's one of the real drawbacks of the deck. It needs to go first. It has a tough time playing through established boards. Next is Branded. Branded, I'd say, is probably somewhere around the tier 1 area. Branded is still really, really, really strong. Yes, Branded Fusion went to 1, but it's not the end of the world that Branded Fusion went to 1, because you know what? It's, yeah, Branded Fusion going to 1 doesn't really matter, because number 1, you can recover the Branded Fusion with the Trap card. You can, yeah, you can add back the Branded Fusion with the Trap card. You can add back the Branded Fusion with Kit. Like, you can add back Branded Fusion. It's not the end of the world. It doesn't really change much because there's so many ways to search Branded Fusion. You have Kit, you have Branded Opening, you have Aluber. Like, there's so many ways to search it. It's not the end of the world. That, like, if it was going to get Ash before, it's still going to get Ash now. So I don't think it's like the end of the world that Branded Fusion's at 1. It obviously hurts the deck, but it's not the end of the world that it was reduced to 1. because you have ways to recover it. Next is Thunder Dragon. I'd say Thunder Dragon with the new Chaos stuff is probably around tier 3. Thunder Dragon has always been a really good kind of like tier 3 archetype. I'd say it's probably still in that department. The new Chaos stuff really helps the deck a lot, and you can definitely mix the two archetypes together. I'd say it's probably somewhere around tier 3. Invoked is somewhere around Rogue. I'll put it near its old friend Shadal's. Yeah, it's probably somewhere around Rogue tier. It just has fallen off. Branded has completely taken over as the better fusion engine. Like Invoked Mechaba was cool and all, but it's just Branded is in every single way better. Next is the birds, the Lyrilusks. I'd probably say it's like at the higher end of Rogue. It's still very good, but it's definitely missing its big boss monster, which was the barrier statue, which really used to be the thing that made the deck hard to play against, because they would end on a barrier statue and then a variety of other interruptions. You have to go to battle phase, out the barrier statue, and then have a bunch of other plays just to even deal with it in any way. Salamangreat is getting new support and actually topped in the TCG somewhat recently. Even without that support, I'd probably say it's somewhere around tier 3. It's a very, very consistent archetype, and it's one of the better structured decks to buy. Scareclaw is getting new support too. I'd probably say as of right now, it's probably somewhere around Rogue. It's got one of the better boss monsters out there, Tryhard, but I'd say it's probably somewhere around Rogue. This is Sky Strikers, probably again somewhere around the top of Rogue. It's a very good archetype, very consistent. It's just got a new Link 2 monster, which is extra good in Sky Strikers. It's okay, and it's useful in other archetypes, but it's extra good in Sky Strikers, which is really good, probably somewhere around Rogue. This is the best ritual deck in the game. I think it's actually better than Mekanko. You can actually mix it with Mekanko if you really wanted to. I'd probably say it's probably around Rogue. I think a lot of people sleep on this archetype, unfortunately, but it is still very, very good. Utopia has 8 million different cards, but unfortunately, despite all of the variety, it only does the exact same things that it's always done. I'd say it's probably somewhere around Rogue. No matter how much support they give this deck, it's got a phenomenon that's kind of like similar to. They give it so many. It's similar to Galaxy Eyes in the sense that they keep giving it support, but they don't actually elevate what the deck is able to do, unfortunately. So you end on the same boards, you just do it more consistently, and it's kind of the problem there. This is Gladiator Beast. I think it's just kind of like a bottom Rogue tier deck. It's a cool deck, but it's definitely not what it used to be in terms of meta representation. This is Plunder Patrol, is probably around tier 3. I actually grabbed the wrong deck. It's probably around tier 3. It's a cool deck. A lot of people don't know what the hell any of the cards do, which is great, because if you're playing it, you can usually take games very easily, because again, no one knows what anything does, and it's such a convoluted deck. It's like things are equipping themselves, they're summoning from the equip, they get additional effects from being equipped. Like, there's so much going on with this deck that you really can't, if you play against somebody and they've never played against this deck, they can't possibly comprehend everything enough to actually sufficiently play against your deck. Sharks is an absolute disaster right now. Bahamut Shark doesn't have Totally Awesome to summon. They have no negates whatsoever, so Rogue is probably where it's going to go. Also, Goes in Match got hidden. Like, a bunch of tools that this deck used to have are gone. Orcus is probably around tier 3. It's a deck that keeps like getting things off the ban list. It just got another thing off the ban list, which was the starter. But unfortunately, again, this is one of those decks that it's kind of like it is from a past era. It used to be good when it was like Salamangrates and Orcus and Sky Strikers and actually Altergeist. Like, these are the 4 right here. It's actually kind of crazy. This used to be like its own metagame, but they've all kind of fallen off because, again, it was just a different. It was a link format. So all of the best decks were all link decks, and a lot of the things that the decks benefited from don't really benefit them anymore. So probably around tier 3. Next is Unchained. Unchained is somewhere around Rogue. It is a super duper grind game deck, but it's one of those decks that unfortunately, as of right now, is requiring the new support. In the TCG right now, it's actually a tier 1 deck. It's actually really, really good because the new support is like sick. But unfortunately, as it is where it is right now, it is a Rogue deck in Master Duel. Skill Drain is very good in this deck, but it's limited to 1. So the way to play the deck in Master Duel right now would be ideally with 3 Skill Drains, but Skill Drain's not around. So it's probably somewhere around Rogue. This is Amazement. It is a trap archetype that is cool, but just not as good as the other. It's not as good as Trap Trick. It's not as good as Labyrinth. Basically, what the synopsis of this archetype is that it has trap cards that equip to either your monsters and your opponent's monsters, and based on that it has different effects. It has a really cool boss monster, which is the administrator guy. Summons himself. He's all really good, but he's just not as good as the Labyrinth boss monsters. Unfortunately, it's one of those archetypes that is just, it came out and it was already power crapped within like an instant. It wasn't as good as Eldritch when it came out, and on top of not being as good as Eldritch, it wasn't as good as Labyrinth. Once Labyrinth just power crapped every other trap deck. Virtual World's probably around Rogue. It's one of the only decks that you can still mix with the Adventure package, and it's not the end of the world. It's a cool deck. It can make Rank 9s, it can make Synchro 6s, it can make Synchro 9s. Like, it can do a lot of different very specific things, but still very cool things. And of course, it's boss monsters. Shen is still very, very good. I use it in other archetypes, but I just don't play this archetype. Ghost Trick is an absolute mess. I never recommend you play. It's one of those like meme decks. It has cool artwork. A lot of people like it for the artwork, but you won't ever catch them playing it. They just kind of own it and have it in their back pocket. Next is this is Marincess. I'd probably say it's probably like around tier 3. It's one of the better water decks out there other than Kairu Shin. Yeah, it's a cool Link water deck. It's got a lot of tools at its disposal. It can make a monster unaffected by everything, which obviously has an inherent advantage in Master Duel, because having things that are unaffected by everything is like a huge, huge deal. So I'd probably say it's somewhere around tier 3, and then it has like a spawn trap card negate. It has a trap that activates in the hand. It's kind of like an imperm that you can activate at any time. It's got some cool stuff. Tri-Brigade is a deck that super duper fell off. It's probably around Rogue. Tri-Brigade, the Birds, like all of these decks kind of got hit because Tri-Brigade just has a very, very low ceiling. It's very, like the amount of things that Tri-Brigade can do is just very, very minimal. It can't make the same boards as like a Dragon Link or a Sword Soul or a Branded or like Purely or any of these decks. Like the boards are just very lackluster, unfortunately, with this deck. Next is Mech Knights. I'd say it's probably somewhere around Rogue. They're a going second deck. You have to go second. It's a going second deck that has to special summon a bunch. So playing against Maxi is just not fun. Rainbow Canvas. This is Weather Painters, probably around Rogue. It's really missing skill drain. Skill drain is at once one of those decks that needs skill drain to function. Not to function, but needs skill drain to like put it over the top. And without skill drain, the deck is just not that great. Harpies is a deck that is crying for new support. It definitely needs new support. It's one of those decks that's kind of stuck in 2014, I almost want to say. And it hasn't gotten a lot of really good support ever since there, other than like Perfume, or you could argue the Synchro Monster. It's a deck that really needs some more support. It's another deck that just, it doesn't really have any boss monsters or like end boards or anything. Like you have a great engine to make rank 4s, but that's about it. Other than that, it's great at popping small trap cards. It's great at getting into rank 4s. Other than that, the deck does pretty much the same thing it did 10 years ago. So it is where it is. Runic is still as annoying as ever. You never want to face this deck. It's probably at the higher end of Rogue. A lot of it got hit, which is really cool because it's made the game a lot more fair. But at the same time, it's just such a... It's just such a frustrating deck to play against, but because of all of the consistency hits, it obviously is significantly less good than it used to be. Naturia is one of the better decks, probably say around tier 2. Naturia with Runic is really good. It's probably around tier 2. A lot of the new Naturia support, and I've been saying it for the last few lists, like eventually this deck is going to be good because then the new support drop is going to be good. I'd say probably around tier 2. Bottom half of tier 2, it's very good. It can make Naturia Beast, which is an unfair card, essentially negate spells forever. So it's probably around tier 2. Madolche is probably around like a tier 3 archetype. Imperm just craps on this deck, but outside of Imperm, obviously you have to deal with all the other hand traps. The deck is a very, very good combo deck, and it's very good with all of the new Earth Fairy stuff, which obviously is the situation there. Very good with the new Earth Fairy stuff, but not by any means broken. Next we've got, I'd say this is probably, this is the Mermills and stuff like that. It's probably around Rogue. You very, very rarely see this deck. Not only is it kind of mid-tier, it's also not really, it's also kind of expensive if we're being honest, and it's kind of a mid-tier. It sucks that Toad got lost because this deck actually used to use Toad quite significantly. Cleave Forts is probably around Rogue. It's a decent archetype. It's like a tribute slash, it's an archetype that really needs skill drain. Skill drain's at 1. Fluffles is a deck that got hit by tier limits getting hit. It's probably somewhere around the top of Rogue. It's a fusion-based archetype that prefers to go second. Although it's a really, really cool archetype, and it's... yeah, Fluffles are really awesome, and they can OTK your opponent. It's one of those things where you suffer from going second in Master Duel. The coin flip decides a lot of the game, so I'd probably say somewhere in Rogue. This is a deck not worth playing. This is the... what is it? Artifact? Don't play Artifact. It's just not a very playable archetype at all. This is Cosmos. I'd say is probably around Rogue. It's a cool archetype where a bunch of the boss monsters can't be targeted. Unfortunately, not being targeted is just not that good anymore. It was a lot better in 2016 than it is now. In 2016, not being targeted was like a huge deal. Not being targeted today is like not even that big of a deal. Next is Speedroids, is probably somewhere around the middle of Rogue. It's a synchro-based archetype that's actually really, really, really good. Ends on really good boards, very consistent. It just it has a hard time competing with some of the meta decks here. But overall, I'd say it's like a decent synchro deck. This got new support, but I'd still say it's like at the bottom of Rogue. This is the Blackluster Soldier Ritual archetype. It's still, in terms of ritual archetypes, it's just not as good as like just playing Drytron or even Mechanco, honestly. It's just not as good as those ritual archetypes, but I'd say it's okay. Shiranui, I put and consider building something else. I don't think you should play Shiranui. I think you should play some of the Shiranui monsters in Zombie World, but don't play Shiranui itself. Vehicroids is avoid at all costs. There's not a single card in this entire archetype that is any good or even worth reading, if I'm being honest with you. The entire archetype, start to finish, sucks. There's not a single broken card. Like, every archetype usually will have at least one broken card. This deck has no broken cards. Not a single broken card in the entire... There's nothing that you read and you're like, wow, I'm excited to summon this. There's nothing there. It is just a vacuum of talent. This deck has nothing. It's embarrassing. This is another deck that I would recommend not playing. This is the Magician Girls. The only Magician Girl maybe worth playing is Chocolate. The rest of them all suck. Chocolate is only good if you already have Dark Magician in the graveyard, so it becomes somewhat decent, but your opponent has to be brain dead to attack your Chocolate Magician without outing it in some other way. Next is, this is the deck you haven't seen a lot of, and neither have I. This is True Dracos. True Dracos have another deck that's just kind of fallen off. It's not as good as it used to be. When they hit all the floodgates, they made this deck significantly worse. Next is Buster Blader. It's another deck that it kind of has to go first because you have to activate the trap to turn your opponent's monsters into dragons, and then it summons a monster, it turns your opponent's monsters into dragons, and then it also summons a monster. Fusion summons a monster that changes all dragons to defense mode, so you have to go first. Going second, that just does absolutely nothing, and trap cards suck going second other than like evenly matched and imperm. Consider building something else as Digital Bugs. It is just a worse version of Crawlers and a worse version of Beach Troopers, honestly. Next is Paleozoics. I put in consider building something else. They keep hitting this deck little by little by little. Unfortunately, I never actually got to play this deck that way. I've always wanted to, but what can you do? It lost its boss monster, and now the deck is somewhat unplayable. This is definitely like tier 3. This is the most expensive deck in the entire game. It's called 8-Axis. It is the most expensive deck in the game. All of the boss monsters in the extra deck are like all URs. All of the main deck monsters are URs. This deck is one of the most expensive archetypes in the entire game, and the payoff is just straight up usually not worth it. Like, I'd say it's a pretty good deck, and it can break most boards, but I'd probably say it's somewhere around tier 3. Like, it's a good deck, but I don't know if it's worth sinking like 1,000 UR dust into just to build a main deck. Definitely not really all that great. Exodia, I avoid at all costs. Like, if you have fun playing Exodia, then play it by all means, but generally I'd say it's probably an avoid at all costs. It's super inconsistent. Spell books are pretty good. You can mix it with like a lot of different things like Dogmatica. You can mix it, just play pure. Like, the deck is actually pretty good. It's probably around Rogue. Super duper duper consistent. This is Crusadia. Is probably somewhere around the middle of Rogue. Crusadia is really good, but by no means broken. It's a deck that you can build going second, or you can build going first. Either way, the deck is actually quite strong. So I would definitely consider it a decent archetype. Next is Prank Kids. This is another deck that's fallen off. I'd probably say it's somewhere around the middle of Rogue. It's another like decent archetype that got hit significantly, but it's still playable, but not like at its full power where it used to be. Same thing with Zodiacs. It's like a decent going second deck. You can make a 6 material Zeus, wipe your opponent's board literally 6 times. Like, it's a cool deck, but nothing broken. Next is Endymion, which I'm going to put right next to Pendulum Magicians. Yeah, Pendulum Magicians, Endymion, Draco Slayers. You can mix them all into one big archetype, and they're all around tier 3. This deck is just as negatively hindered by Kashtira as any of the other decks, because you can block a Pendulum Zone, unfortunately. This is another deck that is... I'm going to put it... Last time I put it, avoid at all costs, and I'm going to keep it there. Because this deck is just not that good. As cool as the artwork is, it's just not that good of a deck. It's awesome. I love it. I love the way it looks. I like the play style. But it's just such a slow deck, and everything has to go right for you to just play decently. This deck I've already reviewed. It's a repeat. Unchained I've already reviewed. It's a repeat. Next, we've got Ancient Gears. Is consider building something else. Ancient Gears you shouldn't build. You should build instead the Machina / Earth Machine deck. Now, if you wanted to build Ancient Gears, you could. But unfortunately, I just don't think that it's actually that good. It's a going second deck that's to summon a bunch of times. So Maxi's automatically annoying. And then on top of it, it's boss monsters unaffected by spells, traps, but not monsters. And monsters are the main form of interruption in the game. Unfortunately, this is Symphonic Warriors. It makes a decent board. It's probably around Rogue. It makes like a 3 interruption board off of 2 cards, but it's just not that great of a archetype whatsoever. Libromancers, I think you should mix with Makenko, and I probably put them right next to each other. They're actually a pretty cool deck together. They're both kind of like ritual engines in a sense, and they have a lot of... this has a lot of really, really broken effects, but unfortunately, I just don't think it's good enough to take it over the top. There's another good archetype. I'd say it's ABC. It's a strong archetype. It's good with links. It's good with fusion summon. It's good with XYZs. Like, it's good in so many different capacities, but with Bystials running around, it's just very hard to even get the fusion summons there. Next is Earth Machine rank 10s. This is just a package that you also play in Earth Machines. Probably say around tier 3. This I wouldn't recommend. I wouldn't recommend playing the Therions pure, but if you're going to play Therions in general, I'd say play it in... There are a lot of decks that you can play individual Therion monsters in, like Plant Link. You can play Therions in Earth Machines. You can play it in Cyber Dragons, but I wouldn't recommend playing like the entire archetype pure. Slifer is to consider building something else. I actually don't think Slifer... I like Slifer is the best of the gods in terms of just like a one-on-one matchup. Like, Slifer has the best effects because it has a floodgate effect, and it has an effect to destroy your opponent's cards, and on top of that, it has, you know, the gaining of the attack and stuff like that. And it can be special summon like Raw. Like, Slifer's really good, but the issue with Slifer is that he is just... There's not really like an archetype based around him like Raw does, and there's no real way to search him other than like those night cards, and the night cards are just not that good. This is probably around tier 2. This is actually quite a decent deck. This is No Punk. No Punk is one of the better synchro engines in the game, and you can play with the Chaos cards. You can play it pure. This is a very, 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 very good deck. I'd say it's probably around tier 2, and the No Punisher is just a crazy card. It can absolutely end games every single time. Very, very, very good deck. And the good thing about the Punk cards and playing on Master Duel is that there's no time rules. Like, yeah, there's a time, but there's no time rule, so it doesn't matter how many life points you pay, you're not going to lose because you paid life points, which gives this deck a real, like, positive jump. Next, we've got Sprites. Sprites did not get hit as significantly as Tier Limits did. Tier Limits got really wrecked on this last ban list because they lost Merly and all this other stuff. They didn't hit the Sprite... They didn't hit the Sprite, they hit, what is it called, the Sprite card that brings Sprite monsters back, or level 2 monsters back from the graveyard. I forget, for some reason I'm forgetting its name. It's not Sprite Sprine, it's the other Sprite, Sprite Link 2, I forget what it is. But they didn't hit that card for some reason. They decided to hit Merly, and they decided to hit like Swap Frog, and like weird stuff. So the deck is like slightly lower in consistency, but overall the deck is pretty much in the same place that it always was, and it's still a very, very strong deck. I'd probably say it's probably around tier 1, up here with the better decks of the game. Dark Magician I already reviewed. This is a repeat. This This is the red resonator deck. I'd say it's probably consider building something else. There are so many other better synchro archetypes at this moment, but I think that honestly it's probably going to be higher up because there is support that's going to be coming out, but I just don't know when. Final countdown is avoid at all costs. The card is limited to 1. It's unsearchable, and you have to wait 20 turns just to win. So I've never actually seen anyone resolve this in Master Duel outside of like the story mode. Gren Maju is probably around tier 3. No one has really been playing this despite how good of a deck it theoretically should be, so I'd probably say it's somewhere around Rogue. You can play it as like a stun deck, or you can play it as a just kind of like a really strong going second OTK deck, but usually 8 Axis ends up being better without the Grand Maju in it. Next is Raw. Raw has the most support of all of the God cards, but unfortunately it is the worst of the God cards because it can only be normal summoned or / tribute summoned. It can't be special summoned in any way, so unfortunately the deck is kind of where it is. Gem Knights are just kind of okay. If they're not FTKing you, then there's really no playstyle there, unfortunately, other than like beat down. So that's probably somewhere around Rogue. Next is Relinquished, is in avoid at all costs with Insta-Fusion at 1. And Insta-Fusion isn't at 1, it's banned actually, so it makes this deck a lot more difficult to play. It's a cool deck, but it's nothing like broken whatsoever. And honestly, I don't think like the biggest problem with Relinquished, it doesn't even have enough cards in the archetype to be all of that good. This is a repeat. We've got Witchcrafters are probably in like the bottom half of Rogue. It has such a low ceiling. It does like the board that it ends on. It's like the Dragon Maid of Spellcasters. Like Dragon Maid is definitely better, but it's like the Dragon Maid of Spellcasters, where like the end board is just like you get like 1 pop and like 1 like imperm of all your opponent's monsters, and that's pretty much it. And the spell cards like recycle themselves, so you have a lot of resources, but other than that, it just does like almost nothing. So it is where it is. I'm going to call this Plant Link. It's Sun Avalon and all of the other plant monsters. I'd probably say it's like at the top half of Rogue. It's actually not top half of tier 3. It's really, really good, and it sets up really crazy boards and on Cactus Bouncer and a variety of other cards. It's actually really, really strong. And then it has the Trap Negate. Like, it's a really, really good deck. I'd probably say it's probably around tier 3. It's like the Plant Link of... Yeah, it's like Plant Link. You have Dragon Link, that's Plant Link. It's very similar. This is Ancient Warrior. It's probably around somewhere around the middle of Rogue. It's a good deck. Very good at going second. It's a deck that's tough to play against. Like, it will surprise you, and then it can play a variety of floodgates like Rivalry and stuff like that. But it's a very, very strong deck. Next, the Shizu cards. At this point, if you're trying to play a pure Shizu deck, there's something up with you. Don't try DDs. You're not that smart. Yeah, this one's rough. Do not play this deck pure. This Agito is actually banned. There's so many cards that are banned. And you know what sucks? I have a Royal Agito, and it's banned. What am I going to do with it? I don't know. I don't want to decraft it. Maybe one day it'll come. It's never coming back, but it's frustrating. G Golem is a deck that can be mixed with a variety of archetypes that are better than it. So you can mix it with Salamangrates, or you can mix it with these guys, the Math Mechs. But honestly, it raises what the deck is able to do, like the ceiling, but it lowers the consistency. I would recommend just leaving it be the way it is. Sue ships are great for events, but not that great in the actual game. It is getting a new support card, but I don't think that it's good enough, if we're being honest. Next is Crawlers. Crawlers probably around the bottom of Rogue. Honestly, if you're going to play any kind of insects, you should just play Bee Troopers wherever they are, and not this. It has a great boss monster, the Machina thing, the Machina Deus Ex guy. Like, that guy's good, but other than him, the deck is kind of like lackluster. Skull Servants are a cool deck, probably around like the middle of Rogue, or like the bottom half of Rogue. Was really cool. This deck was really cool when Grass Arena was at 3, but with Grass at 1, it's just not really all that as good. Next, we've got Teardrops. What is it? Well, the Teardrop is the main boss monster. Rika's Orica's is definitely somewhere around tier 2. It's one of the best budget decks in the game, honestly, and it's very, very competitive. It's a deck that basically, it's a Glare of Darkness. It tributes your opponent's monsters for cost, and they don't see it coming, and then you win. So this deck is actually quite good, and it forms a variety of really good interruptions, and it's a fairly skillful deck, all things considered, so it's definitely somewhere around tier 2. Gaia is a mess. This deck is another going second deck. You definitely can win with it. It's one of the archetypes that's one of my guilty pleasures. I really like to play this deck, but unfortunately, it's just very, very tough to special summon 50 times and have to go second in Master Duel, and have to fuse. So the problem is when you're fusing, this deck doesn't have a branded fusion or a brilliant fusion. There's no sending from the deck as material. You fusion summon from your hand, so it's very resource intensive, and you have to go second, so you're playing into really strong boards. This is a deck that really fell off Numerons. So the reason that this deck fell off is just because a lot of decks in the top half have very good grind games. Numeron has a good matchup against certain decks. It has a good matchup against Sword Soul, for example, because Sword Soul just kind of ends on a board, and if you get out that board, you basically win. But the problem is it doesn't have a great matchup against something like Sprite, which has multiple negates that you can kind of deal with. It has monsters that are recurable. Same thing with Branded. Branded is the worst nightmare for a Numeron player, because again, Branded has so much recursion that even if you're able to get rid of their board, they just summon a new monster and a new monster and a new monster, protect their life points, and then they just destroy you the next turn. Don't play this. This is a Destiny board. It's just, I don't even need to say it, honestly. It's just that bad. This is Speedroids. I'm sorry, not Speedroids. It's Junk Speeder, but this is Synchrons. I'd recommend playing Synchrons, but only when they get the new support. As of right now, Synchrons are a little bit too reliant on Junk Speeder, and if you could stop Junk Speeder, you basically win, and if you don't stop Junk Speeder, you lose. Amazoness is a decent bottom of rogue archetype. It's a cool archetype, and it got the MX Saber Invoker available to it, but again, it's just not... MX Saber Invoker doesn't really help the deck as much as you would think. This is probably consider building something else. I wouldn't recommend playing Vernusluz Pure. Probably play them with Madolches or Earth Machines, or some of the Ishizu cards. Same thing with the Kaijus. Don't play Kaijus Pure. Play them with something else. Kaijus on their own are just kind of iffy. Sacred Beasts are a good archetype. They're probably somewhere around the middle of Rogue. They're a good archetype, by no means broken, and they can have some trouble going second. Going first, if they set up their board, it's actually really tough to out. Their field spell is crazy, has Pot of Greed, and it makes their monsters they can't be destroyed by card effects. The archetype is actually really good. It just has some small issues. Next is Generators. Generators are getting new cards soon, so that'll make the archetype even better. But as of right now, I'd probably say it's somewhere around Rogue. What it really misses is his boss monster, which was the True King of all Calamity. But it is getting some new cards that are really good in, I don't know when. I can't tell you, because who knows when stuff comes out in Master Duel, but it's going to come out at some point soon. Dark World is another deck that's really good. I'd say it's probably somewhere around Rogue. It's one of those decks that it's another one that is missing two cards of support, which is one is colorless, and the other one is a new card that'll make the deck very consistent. It lets you add any Dark World and then discard a card, which is that card is really, 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 really good. So hopefully that comes out sometime soon. Next is Goatee. Goatee is probably around Rogue. It's a synchro-based archetype. They're fish that synchro summon. They banish themselves. It's a very, very different archetype than a lot of other archetypes that are in the game. It's very unique, and I love that about the deck. But honestly, this doesn't compete with some of the higher skill ceiling decks, especially the tier 2 and tier 1 stuff. Unless you're running unless you're going first and they didn't draw hand traps, then you can compete. I wouldn't recommend playing the Dragon Rulers Pure. There's literally 2 of them, so it's almost impossible to play Pure. Next we've got, this is Samorg. I'd say it's probably around tier 3. It's a cool deck. It misses the barrier statue, and but overall I'd say it's a pretty cool deck. It's cool that in Master Duel you still have access to the Link 3 monster, which you don't have access to in the TCG. This is Evil Eye. Evil Eye overall is a pretty cool archetype. It can set up board states that are just very, very difficult to out for your opponent. So I'd probably say it's like the higher end of Rogue. And a lot of the new support is actually really quite good. Next is, that was it. These are all repeats. That is the entire tier list here, so we can go through it real quick. This is the tier 1 decks, probably the better decks in the game. Tier 2, tier 3. Obviously, this is all subject to change, and as I always say, at the end of the day, you can pretty much make it to master with any deck as long as you're kind of a skillful player. This just gives you kind of a synopsis of how easy your journey will be. So if you're playing Dragon Link, it'll be a lot easier to get to master with Dragon Link than it is to get to master with like Tri Brigade, for example. So overall, that's it. If you think I should add any archetypes, if I'm missing anything, please let me know, and thank you for watching. La, 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 la.